It is good to see you all this morning, and like I said earlier, we're now feeling like we've got some familiar faces. This is the third session that we've had this week, and speaking personally, I'm got so much out of the two speakers we've had already, and I'm really encouraged and enthused about how things have been going so far, and we're looking forward to the rest of the sessions. It is one of the great things that has come out of this incredibly difficult year, that we are able to do things like this. We have folk primarily from the 5 districts, from Sheffield, Yorkshire West, Yorkshire North and East, Darlington and Newcastle. I know we have 1 or 2 interlopers with us from elsewhere in the connection, including the very far south coast. It's good to have you with us as well. Just to introduce myself, my name's Carolyn Godfrey and I'm the Regional Safeguarding Officer, so I cover the Darlington district and the Newcastle district. Lurking somewhere on your screen, we have Alison Hill, who is the DSO for Sheffield, and Katie Spencer-Madden, who is the DSO for Yorkshire North and East. And it's fantastic on behalf of the DSOs in these districts to welcome you today. We also have our fantastic tech team working in the background, keeping all the tech running smoothly. Speaking of which, just a few bits of housekeeping this morning. If you can remain on mute through the session, we would be very grateful. It helps to prevent background noise and stops echoey feedback, so the speaker is clearer for everybody. You are allowed to take yourself off mute when you're in the breakout rooms, though. You're allowed to talk to each other then. We will be using breakout rooms. So far this week, breakout rooms have been called after countries. Yesterday it was confectionery. I'm waiting to see what today's are going to be called. This is one of our challenges of the week. Have a bit more variety than breakout rooms 1, 2, 3, 4. If you do have a question or if you just want to send greetings, feel free to use the chat. The other DSOs and I will be monitoring the chat and picking up any questions, but it's a place to share anything that you feel might be helpful. We are recording these sessions, and the links to them and any additional documents and PowerPoint slides are going to be sent out once the whole week is done. We have an act of worship planned for Sunday, which will be hosted on YouTube, and the link to that will be sent out at the end of this week. That has been put together by the 5 chairs of district. Again, one of the great ways of working this way is that even though 3 of the chairs of district are currently on sabbatical, they've been able to participate and in this act of worship. So we're looking forward to that, which will draw the whole week to a close. This is, as I've said at the previous 2 sessions, this is a new venture for us. It's been quite an act of faith to try and run something like this, and things have gone fairly smoothly up to now, and we hope that they will run smoothly, but we do thank you in advance for your patience if there are any hiccups. We're going to start with a time of devotion, and today I will be once again using the Bible reading that has been behind our thinking about this conference right from the very start, right from when Alison and Katie and myself first started thinking about this back in the autumn. This is from 1 Peter chapter 4. The end of all things is near. Therefore be serious and discipline yourself for the sake of your prayers. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. Like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, Serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. Whoever speaks must do so as one speaking the very words of God. Whoever serves must do so with the strength that God supplies, so that God may be glorified in all things through Jesus Christ. To him belong the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. I'd like to read something to you from a devotional tool that we as Methodists are very familiar with. We don't necessarily think of it in that way, but I'd like to read to you a hymn from Singing the Faith. Singing the Faith is a fantastic book of prayers, which happen to be set to music, but is a great resource for us to use in our prayers. So the first prayer I'm going to use is number 478 in Singing the Faith, and is by Fred Kahn. Thank you, O God, for the time that is now, for all the newness your minutes allow. Make us alert with your presence of mind to the fears and longings that move humankind. Thank you, O God, for the time that is past, for all the values and thoughts that will last. May we all stagnant tradition ignore, leaving behind things that matter no more. Thank you for hopes of the day that will come, for all the change that will happen in time. God, for the future our spirits prepare, hollow our doubts and redeem us from fear. Make us afraid of the thoughts that delay, faithful in all the affairs of today. Keep us, Creator, from playing it safe. Thank you that now is the time of our life. And another prayer. God of green and pleasant places, and of dark, uncomfortable places, you call your people to be in every part of your creation. Give us courage and wisdom to leave behind some of those things that are too easy to cherish, and to walk in love where we are needed most with Jesus Christ. So may our conversations be significant. May our meeting be blessed. May our paths cross the paths of those who love you. May our paths cross the paths of those who don't know you. May our touch be your touch of infinite gentleness. May our words be your words of wisdom. May our eyes see with your compassion. Be with us, God, in all we say and we do today, we ask. Amen. We are delighted to have the Rev Richard Teal with us today. Richard is the current president of the Methodist Conference, and we are so grateful that he has found the time during his very busy presidential year to join us. Through his ordained ministry, he served in the circuits in the northeast and Yorkshire. He moved to the other side of the Pennines for a while to be the chair of the Cumbria district, but we welcomed him back to this side of the Pennines, where he is currently a superintendent in a circuit in the Yorkshire North and East district. I know that Richard has a pastoral heart, and we are looking forward to him sharing with us as we reflect on a range of aspects of church life this week. Thank you again, Richard, for all your support in what we're doing and for sharing with us this week. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that very warm and lovely introduction. Friends, it is lovely to be with you today, and I do, as President, bring you the greetings of the whole of the Methodist Church. It's a joy to be able to do so. So we can just move to the first slide, please, Liddy. That would be great. The gift of place is what I've been asked to share with you today, and I was really delighted to hear that the first two sessions have been really quite brilliant. Today may be a little bit different, but I'll do the best that I can, and thank you for giving me the title. Because during the pandemic, our churches have been locked shut, even though during the central festivals of the Christian church, which means so much to us when we gather, of Christmas and Easter and Pentecost, just three examples. But our church buildings have been for us far more than just brick and mortar, because place is fundamental to human existence. And yet our sense of place has been greatly diminished during the past months of the pandemic. So in this session, we think about place. We think about our buildings. Are they important any longer? Are they not? How have we been church without them? All under the umbrella of safeguarding. I've asked two of my dear friends if they would take part this morning, and I've asked the first one if he would just talk about the importance of place. So you're not listening to me talking all the time. We've got some different voices speaking. And so Jonathan Pye, who's chair of the Bristol district, is going now to talk about place. It's a little longer than what I asked for, but the quality is quite brilliant. So over to Jonathan now to talk about the importance of place.
In the book of Joshua, at the place where the people of God crossed the river Jordan, they built a cairn. For the Israelites, displaced by years of wilderness wandering, the stones which they set up beside the river were a physical sign of God's presence. A way of saying not just to themselves, but to succeeding generations, here we experience the presence of God. Here God became real to us. Of course, it wasn't the only place that they'd felt God close as they journeyed. At every turn of their lives, God had been present. But here, as they crossed the river, they paused and they set up a cairn, memorial stones, so that when in future days their children might ask, what do these stones mean? They would reply, these stones are an everlasting reminder, a reminder of God's presence. And they capture a sense of confidence and a sense of thanksgiving in the life of the community as they come out of a wilderness experience. In just the same way, church buildings are a visible and tangible sign of the presence of God at the heart of community. They are not a repository for God, something that says to those outside the institution, God is here and nowhere else, but rather a sign of God in the midst, God present in the complexities of life, in human community and relationship, transforming them by his presence. Nor do they say to those inside the institution, here God is kept, a bit like the genie of the lamp. Rather, they are a sign and a reminder that God is here only because God is everywhere present, though the setting apart of place attunes us to the God who speaks in each and every place and every moment. God is present in place because those who are a gathered people are embodied and are seeking by their life together to live as a kingdom community. Thus, physical place is both a sign and more than a sign. It is not just a collection of stones, but as the New Testament reminds us, a living sign of a living God. For God's people, the church is both the sign of their life in community, a meeting place, a place of encounter and of renewal or growth, but also the sign and reminder of the covenant relationship in which God and people are committed to a deepening relationship with each other. For those outside, it expresses the commitment to their lives too, set as our buildings are at the heart of communities, surrounded by homes and shops and schools, in the midst of places where people live and work and engage with others. Embodied selves always need place, since place both shapes human identity and enfolds us in community. Places, therefore, are both the product and the ground of shared human experience. In her book Uprooted, Grace Olmsted writes, "Sometimes you don't sense or understand your roots, how they make you what you are, until you've been uprooted." Walter Brueggemann, whose writings have become a seminal source of reflection in the current pandemic, argued in his book The Land that space becomes place when it becomes theologically significant. He writes, "Space has historical meanings, where some things have happened which are now remembered and which provide continuity and identity across generations. Place is space in which important words have been spoken, which have established identity, defined vocation, and envisioned destiny. Place is a space in which vows have been exchanged, promises have been made, and demands have been issued. Place is indeed a protest against the unpromising pursuit of space." Brueggemann emphasises that since rootedness in place is part of the biblical story from the very beginning, that it is rootlessness and not meaninglessness that characterises the current crisis. There are, he says, no meanings apart from roots. And thus valuing a theology of place is an anchor, something to tether us back into community, into our bodies, and into greater intimacy with God, since, as in the Incarnation, we always know God in the particular rather than in the abstract. The current pandemic, by thrusting us into liminal space, has literally displaced us. Over the past year, with a global pandemic and a national lockdown, which was a difficult necessity in limiting the spread of the COVID-19 virus, we have experienced not only a necessary but disturbing distancing from other people, but a radical dislocation from the places which form for us the locus of community, including our church buildings. While it's undoubtedly true that, in the words of a senior ecumenical colleague, the pandemic has faced us with the biggest sea change in our relationship to buildings since the Reformation, the view espoused by some that buildings will have no place in a post-pandemic church is one which is fatally flawed. Place is fundamental to human existence. Yet our sense of place and its importance has drastically diminished in today's postmodern and globalised world. The move from place to network has been part of the significant cultural shift of late modernity, or what is sometimes described as post-modernity, and it's one that's now gone on for many decades. This shift has doubtless been exacerbated by the current pandemic, in which life on Zoom and the delivering of worship online have played an important role, and one which is likely to remain, at least in part, woven into the fabric of any post-pandemic church. Although it has offered much that has been good and helpful into our current context, digital technology will always be a good servant but a bad master, because it risks undermining our rootedness in tangible community and place. Indeed, the virtual reality of internet space can become more enticing to us than the tangible reality of physical space. In her article, Finding Ourselves, Theology, Place and Human Flourishing, Professor Elaine Graham talks about the significance of space and place for finding ourselves. Not, she says, just on a grid, but as fully human. This is why the Methodist Conference and the Faith and Order Committee have been so rightly cautious in the face of the clamour for online communions, despite the deprivations of the COVID-19 pandemic. In his book, Liberating Rights, the American theologian Tom Driver argues that the territory that ritual marks is both literal and metaphoric. It's well and good to speak of sacred space, provided we remember that in and of itself, the space is not what is sacred. Places that encompass sacred spaces therefore become what Jonathan Smith describes as a focusing lens. Such physical places offer us a bridge between the sacred and the profane, the physical and the spiritual, the existential and the transcendent. And thus, since bridges by their very nature exist in the spaces between objects, it's also constitutive of community in the sense that we speak of bridging the gap. And therefore it reduces the isolation which flows from the disruption of context in which life is given meaning. This, of course, has been one of the key characteristics of lockdown and the current pandemic. The Methodist Church in Ireland's 2009 Faith and Order report, Theology of Place, One Place for All Places, asserts that discipleship is worked out in particular places, whether rural, suburban or urban, along roads and streets and avenues and beside real flesh and blood neighbours. We cannot simply work out our faith dislocated from the world around us. Space really matters. The conclusion then is clear. Our communities, urban, suburban and rural, need our sacred places as the promise of blessing for the whole community. These places, as well as the communities that worship in them, exist as a foretaste of the eschatological blessing that awaits the whole creation. Place is therefore more than a location, since, as we have seen, place both embodies and shapes human society. Indeed, Ernst Conradi has postulated that one may even argue that a theology of place is not only about the presence of God in creation, but also about the place of creation within God. This is resonant of Sally McFaig's reflection on embodiment. In her book, The Body of God, she argues that embodiment requires a theology of space and place, since each life form is a body that occupies and requires space in order to obtain the necessities of life. Thus, Sigurd Bergman is right when he writes, "Theology's reflections about space and place provide a deep challenge and an urgent necessity for theology to become aware of its embeddedness in the existential spatiality of life." Places then matter, for that is where we live and move and have our being. Despite all that technology can offer us, and it has much to offer us, without place and a sense of place, we will always be rootless, displaced even while we live in this world. Perhaps it's appropriate then to conclude with T.S. Eliot's words in his poem Little Gidding. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. That, I think, is no bad agenda for theological reflection on a theology of place.
We thank Jonathan for his very erudite thinking and expression of the importance of place, which is what we're thinking about today in a changing and very varied society, particularly during the last number of months. We're going now to go into groups. I think the questions have been sent out, but if Lydie, if we could please just have the questions put on the screen, that would just be helpful, which is the third slide, please, if that's convenient. And the questions are also in chat as well. So the first one is, and I'm going to talk about this later on this morning, but the first question is, young people, and that's the people who've talked to me, have shared with me the importance of being back in church. By back in church, they mean the place of which Jonathan's been talking about, back in the building. They've talked about the importance of sacred space and of safe space. What do you think they mean by this? And what do we mean by it? That's the first question. And the second question is, as we begin to return to our church buildings, how will we ensure they're safe places for all people? And the word all is very, very important. So we'll have 10 minutes, so we'll come back just before 22 in our groups. Please introduce yourselves when you get into groups. Please ensure that somebody is prepared just briefly to report back so we can learn a little bit from each other. We won't go around every group, but we'll go around one or two of the groups. So please have somebody to briefly report back, introduce yourselves when you get into the groups, and if the tech team could now put us into groups, that would be great. Well, welcome back, friends. I hope you've had a good breakout group and some really, really good conversation. I'm just going to pick on a couple of groups because we haven't got time to go around everybody, just to do a brief report on how you've coped with those two questions. Staveley, whoever Staveley was.
We didn't decide, but I'm happy to share a few things.
Bless you, if you would. That'd be just great of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andy. It's Andy. Hello, Andy. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Richard. We questioned what young meant because we think there's different experiences for different age groups, and we know young is anybody under 60.
Yep.
I think one of the significant things we thought is the things that the young people are raising at 3Gen, we as adults don't feel safe to talk about in church. So if you talk about sexuality, we don't feel it's a safe space to talk about. So why should they? I'm interested that my son, having been denied a space, has created spaces on Minecraft for him and his friends to be. So they find a space in a different way that is more interactive than our spaces. One of the big ones I thought was, did the children belong to the physical building before the pandemic, or were they on the edge of it and the adults really owned it and they were kind of fitted in? So how much did they belong physically? How much could they shape the space of the church when they were with us before the pandemic? And can we do something about that? And certainly for the toddlers, there's no replacement for being able to run around in a big space and give everybody a hug and play. So we recognise there's a real physical difference. And then the online stuff, technical skills vary, and the way we've been able to interact is probably quite varied. So I don't know if that covered everything. Anybody else wants to say anything?
And anything on question 2, Andy, that you might just bring question 2 out a little bit or not?
Well, I think we've discovered some level of participation online. A lot of us have. So small groups of teenagers have been able to talk about these issues online. And I might personally think safe spaces are small groups, and that we need to get used to being able to deal with big questions in intimate groups. And that for me, is a safe space we don't have universally and should have.
Yeah. one of the joys and celebrations of early Methodism. Yeah, in a modern way. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. And let's move to, I think, what about Anik? What about Anik?
I can say a few things about Anik. I think in relation to the first question, we found it really difficult to answer because our experiences were all different. And we think that will be the case across the connection and across age groups, that it's very difficult to say this group of people have had this experience and that group have had the other experience. Though we did recognise that for many of us in our group, certainly growing up, church spaces were really important in that sense of belonging and developing relationships and community with other people of our own age. I think in relation to the second question, there was one specific thing that we acknowledged, which is that it will be really important for anyone in positions of leadership, not just ordained, but anyone, to be prepared to deal well with any disclosures that are made from folk who have struggled in their home over the last 18 months, whatever age group they're in.
Yeah. Lovely, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. Grateful for that. Let's move on then to the next part. Well, I think we move away a little bit now from sacred spaces. We've looked at it as place, as Jonathan has theologically grounded it for us. To, where have you gathering this morning? Where have you found sacred space during lockdown? We're going to have a much shorter video now from another friend of mine who I worked with for 11 years. And she sees no reason why we should have church buildings whatsoever, and never has done. And this is sort of her testimony to that. And this is, and some of you will know her, this is Breck Seaton.
Margaret Silf uses the words, "the place where I am who I truly am before God." This is my sacred space. The place where I am who I truly am before God. The place I go to for rest, recuperation, to seek God's guidance, to wrestle with a challenge. Mostly, this is a place to be who I truly am before God. A place where words aren't necessary, music, social media are absent. It is quite simply the place where I am. It's the safest place on earth, a place to recover and rest, a place of affirmation. Yet it's also a challenging place. A place where my innermost thoughts, my attitudes, prejudices, my outlook, they're all there in view of God. A place where I open my soul before myself and God. So my sacred space, well, it's also a dangerous place. For to be who I truly am in my sacred space, there's no hiding. Yet to move forward, to become more of who I seek to become in Christ, there isn't any staying still. This is the thing about my sacred space. When I emerge, I'm not the same as when I entered. I can't be, for I've met with Christ. My life is richer, more whole than before, and I can't go back to who I was, for that place doesn't exist anymore. I am who I am now before God. If you like, a liminal space. The place in between who I was and who I am to become. When I enter my sacred space, I leave behind some of what I knew and open myself up to a new understanding, a new way of being. Usually small changes that added up over a lifetime. I see a significant shift in who I was and who I am now. So my sacred space, it's a beautiful place. A place to challenge, yeah, but mostly a place to be. A place to listen rather than talk. A place away from the distractions of the world. A place of stillness, but not quiet. A place where I go to hear God speak to me. A place to be with God. I find this sacred space in many places. Anywhere I choose to be with God in this intentional way to be. Usually I choose to meet with God in the hills, for this is the place I most easily enter my sacred space, while walking or sitting and taking in the sights and sounds of creation. I might journey with a fellow traveller into this sacred space, or God might bring along someone to join me for a while on the hill. Sometimes I'm alone with God. For the hills, well, they offer this vastness. It's not limited to the walls of a building. The hills of solitude from the race that life can become. They offer exercise and a time to process, a time to be. And for me, the hills are the most natural place to be with God, to seek guidance, to be challenged, and simply to be in the presence of the one who loves me. Today, this is my sacred space. Amongst the deer, amongst the lambs, amongst the birds, sat above the river, with the bluebells starting to emerge into the warmth of spring. My sacred space is quite simply the place to be with God, the place where I am who I truly am before God.
Well, we thank Breck for a very different understanding about sacred space to one of Jonathan's, but equally, of course, as valid. So where have you found sacred space during these past months of the pandemic? Let's have slide 5, please. We're just going to talk a little for a moment or two just about stillness. Being still. A lot of people this year have spoken to me very movingly about, during lockdown, about being still and the importance of it. In whatever way of praying you choose, it's good to begin with a period of stilling. Some days you won't get beyond this exercise, and that's okay too. And just here, as we move through in the next few minutes, here are 3 popular stilling exercises. Most people find it helpful to sit with the back straight and with both feet on the ground. So we move to 6, please, slide 6. Body awareness. Going from toe to head. Become aware of each part of the body in turn for the space of 3 slow breaths. Whether it's a warm or cold, you can feel clothing, the movement of breathing, itching, pain, or other sensations. Where there is tension, just let it go. Imagine the tension flowing down the body, out through the feet to the earth. Slow breathing. Consciously take deep and slow breaths. You might imagine yourself breathing in the Spirit of God and breathing out this same Spirit to others. Or you might breathe out all that you want to be rid of. So body awareness. Other people have found being still, listening to sounds. That's slide 7, please. Listening to sounds, sound 7, please. Hang on. No, the other way, backwards. That's it. Just become aware of sounds inside and outside of the room. Don't dwell on any particular sound, but listen for as many sounds as possible, particularly those subtle sounds. We move to slide 8. Slow breathing. Lots of people have found this really, really, really helpful during these past few months. Consciously take deep and slow breaths. You imagine yourself breathing in the Spirit of God and breathing out the same Spirit to others. Or you might breathe out all that you simply want to be rid of. And slide 9. Relying on an old favourite. Lots of people have spoken to me this year about relying on a prayer that they know, or as Carolyn said in the opening devotions, a hymn which has been so significant. And what those hymns and what those prayers have just meant this year. I have been hugely sustained by Andrew Pratt's wonderful hymn, Best of All is God is With Us, which is the presidential theme this year. I've sung it online at least once a week. I've used it in my devotions most day, and it has just taken on a fantastic meaning for me of support and encouragement this year. And I have never ever known in 39 years in the Methodist ministry how the Methodist Covenant service this year has been talked about so much, particularly during January. The Covenant service, which we all know and we attend every year and is meaningful, but this year in particular, people have spoken to me about its huge, huge significance, and particularly the covenant prayer, and how they have used it time and again throughout the year, and what it has meant in a totally new way. And the covenant service will never be the same again. I'm no longer my own but yours. Put me to what you will, rank me with whom you will. Put me to doing, put me to suffering. Let me be employed for you or laid aside for you, exalted for you or brought low for you. Let me be full, let me be empty. Let me have all things, let me have nothing. I freely and wholeheartedly yield all things to your pleasure and disposal, and now glorious and blessed God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you are mine and I am yours, so be it. And the covenant now made on earth, let it be ratified in heaven. Let's move on to the next slide, slide 10. Go on a prayer walk. People have found prayer walks hugely helpful this past number of months. A labyrinth is different than a maze in that there is one path that leads to this, right to the centre. No dead ends, no misleading routes, just a simple winding line that allows you to go and get lost without losing your way. And these labyrinths can be found on the floors of cathedrals in Europe, where worshippers walk the winding path and pray as they go. The centre symbolising whatever it is that they are seeking. During the Easter weekend this year, virtually I visited the Shetland district. We had a fantastic visit, and I was taken to one of the villages in Shetland where the minister had created a labyrinth in the church garden simply by mowing the lawn and a few stones. And he spoke with tears in his eyes about how every single person within that village had used the labyrinth at some point in these past few months and what it had meant to them, every single person in the village. Slide 11. This is a finger labyrinth. People again have found this helpful. Place your finger at the centre of the labyrinth and slowly trace your way along the path to let your thoughts become quiet. And as you go along, perhaps ask yourself, what do I need today? And speak to God as you would to a friend. Just another way people have found God in these past few months. Let's go on to slide 12, the making of a gratitude board. I don't know about you, but I have found in these months, particularly at first, very difficult to find being grateful for things. And so I made myself a board like the one that you can see. We know that gratitude is good for us, noticing the good things, however small, around us. And as Christians, we're invited to receive these good things as gifts and as miniature revelations of the nature of God. Why not start a small gratitude board in your room as I did? I found it really helpful. Doesn't need to be fancy, but it could be. And practicing noticing the gifts around you day by day. And here's a prayer that may help you to notice the gifts in your day. Breathe in God's love. Breathe out into God how you are right now. Ask for God's light as you look over the day. What makes you glad? Breathe it in. What makes you sad? Let yourself feel it. Do not be afraid. Breathe in God's love. What do you need to help you? And let God know. Now, of course, there are lots and lots of other ways that we have been and found God during the past 18 months. As president of the conference, it's been wonderful to go all over the connection, hearing about how the church has been different. But these are just some of the ways that I have found and heard of people have found God during this time. But it's been a privilege to hear so many others. But of course, we must move to the next slide, because another way in which we found God, of course, is via Zoom. How could we not talk about Zoom this morning? And we're all on it. What would we have done as a church without Zoom? I found myself as president of the conference Zooming morning, afternoon and evening, reaching more people across the world and around British Methodism than any other president has ever done. Indeed, one former president of the conference said to me very recently, "Richard, you are like a rash. You simply get all over." Well, let me just share with you one day in the life of this year's president, because I just want to try to explain a little bit about the importance of Zoom and modern technology. It's just one day from last September, and it typifies a day in the life of this year's president. Last May, I should have gone to Uganda with All We Can, that great Methodist charity, to visit 3 different Methodist projects out there. Obviously, I couldn't go due to the pandemic, so All We Can arranged for me to go via Zoom. And on this Wednesday morning in September, I visited 3 different All We Can projects. They were on the screen, the people were there, the projects were there, those who led it, those who were part of it. And I felt at the end that I knew these projects as well as if I'd actually physically visited. When that part of the day had finished, I recorded a sermon and send it on WeTransfer. I'd never heard of WeTransfer until the pandemic, because lots of people this year have just asked me, as they couldn't in the old days, "Richard, will you please just send us a sermon that we can use?" Churches have done it, circuits have done it, and it's been a joy to do so. When I'd done that, I then went to speak at a rural webinar, which I really enjoyed. And then I went with churches together in Britain and Ireland to Ireland for a church leaders meeting about the Brexit border. And on the screen, sat next to me, I was in the middle. On the left of me, there was Archbishop Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and on the right of me, Archbishop Vincent Nichols, the Archbishop of Westminster. And that was such a high-powered meeting, and it was very, very good. And we just did it in an hour and a half. Now, all that had been completed by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I put on my Facebook what had happened that day. And within moments, the superintendent of the Truro circuit in Cornwall, I think jokingly said, "Richard, will you come to our church council tonight?" So he was rather surprised when I rang him up and said, "Mark, I would love to come to your church council tonight. What time does it start?" And I went on Zoom to the church council in Truro in the evening, led devotions for them, brought them the greetings of the church, spent probably a quarter of an hour with them. But that's just reflective of how it is today to be the president of the conference. And it's a very different story to the one I would have told before the pandemic. Zoom has been an incredible blessing. What on earth would we have done without it? And in the circuit where I am superintendent, certainly at the beginning of lockdown, worship via Zoom or via YouTube, we had far more people worshipping with us than we had in the pews normally on a Sunday. And on the daily prayer meeting we started at 9 o'clock in the morning, we can have in this very scattered rural circuit up to 100 people joining us for prayer every day when it's convenient to them. If we'd done it in the old way, I suspect nobody would have turned up. We've been able to have business meetings, Bible studies. I was in the Glasgow circuit just a few weeks ago, and they were telling me that in the Glasgow circuit there was no Bible studies at all, and there hadn't been for a long, long time. Since they'd gone online, over 2/3 of the circuit now met in Bible study groups on Zoom. Messy churches have grown in some areas. Coffee mornings on Zoom have been so popular. When I did my district visit to East Anglia, I met a church of 6 members in a village, and they'd been 6 for over 20 years. They hadn't grown, they hadn't diminished, there were just 6 members. But in the village, they decided that they would go onto Zoom on a Thursday morning for coffee. and people around the village started to hear about it. And that coffee morning grew from those 6 Methodists to 30 people in the village. They've now decided, as these Methodists just very gradually, very gently talked a little bit about their faith, other folk were saying, well, we've never been to church, or Sunday's not convenient for us. Why don't we continue the coffee morning when we're able in the Methodist church on a Thursday? And let's meet for worship on a Thursday. And if things go well, let's have lunch together and create community. And so this little Methodist chapel of 6 members will not open again on a Sunday for 6, but it will open on a Thursday for 30 in a very different way. Power of modern technology. Thousands of people have connected with us who weren't connected with us before from all over the country, and that includes new disciples and those for whom we have reconnected. When I was visiting Somerset just a few weeks ago, I met a 95-year-old opera singer who had been a Methodist all her life, and the Methodist Church was her family. And at 94, through frailty, she'd had to go into an old people's home, and people couldn't visit during COVID, and she couldn't go to worship, and she'd never missed throughout her life, and it meant so much to her. But she'd bought an iPad, and the home taught her how to use it, and she was online on a Sunday for their Zoom service. And over coffee afterwards in the breakout room, I met Sally, and she had a huge smile on her face, because now she'd reconnected with her church family, which meant the world to her. I've been able, through the power of digital technology, to meet far more young people than I would otherwise have been able to do as president. And going back to what I said right at the very beginning, I have to say that in every case, without me saying anything, and I'm talking about teenagers here, they've spoken to me about getting back to church, and they've talked so positively about the physical building. And I certainly didn't expect to hear this, and it's really exercised my mind during the past few months. But these teenagers have spoken, as I said earlier, to me about 2 things: about a church building, about it being a safe space. And I really want those of you this morning who are involved in safeguarding just to hear this and to celebrate it, because it's so much down to you. We would not have spoken in these terms a few years ago in the Methodist Church. And to think now that young people in Methodism are saying the church is a safe space, and by that they mean the building, I think is hugely positive. And if you don't take anything else away this morning, please take this away with you with our huge thanks. And secondly, they've spoken about the building being a sacred space, which we thought about earlier on. So an online presence has been vital for us and will continue to be vital for us, for we must not return to just where we were 18 months ago, because that was far from perfect. Digital technology, in my opinion, is the door into the room, but it may not be the room itself. So our future must be hybrid, our future must be blended. And I would go as far as saying that if a church has no digital presence, its future is very limited, when the majority of people now communicate in this way. The gift of place has been our theme this morning. But where is that place now? Where is that place now? We knew 18 months ago. Well, I think it's blended. It is both online and physical. And our final questions will help us to be ready for this when eventually we are allowed to return to some kind of normality, whatever that may be. And so the questions are in the chat. They've been sent out. There are 2 of them. If we could just have the last slide, please. Where have you personally found sacred space during lockdown? And secondly, the post-pandemic church will continue to have an online presence. How do you keep safe online? And again, if we have two groups just reporting back, and if glass houses could be one of those, that would be wonderful. So if somebody could report back, that would be great. So 10 minutes in groups, and then we're back together for a quick reporting back, and then we finish this part of this. Well, welcome back, friends, and hope you've had a good conversation. Just a couple of groups to report back, which will bring us up to our 11:30 finish. So glass houses, did you this time have the chance to ask somebody just to report back for us?
Yes, it's me.
Lovely. And who's me?
Yes, our first question, how we've personally found sacred space. Lovely examples. Walking on the beach at Filey, a lucky person who lived there. Morning prayer in the Nid Valley, a regular morning prayer, and wants it to continue. One member of the group, an app on the phone was very, very useful for creating sacred space. WhatsApp groups. There was a lovely quote from one member. She'll use it. The devil said, "I've closed all your churches," but God said, "I've opened new ones." through digital technology.
Wonderful.
And then another one, blessings from kind acts, people, neighbours doing kind things, vaccination centres where everybody there was caring for us, books, the time to read, time from busy lives, the time to read. So that was our first question.
Jean, that's great. Thank you for that. And I live very near to Filey. Actually, I'm just in Driffield, which is the beach at Filey is wonderful. It's great. So that's some super things there. Thank you so much. And the second question, how did you get on with that one?
Well, we thought this was a big question. From looking at the difficulty of monitoring digital online stuff with teenagers and how we deal with that. And then with older folks, it's a bit scary. There's a lot of scams around, and a lot of learning for people in my age group, so that we don't become unsafe. That's as far as we got.
That's great. Thank you so much. We're really grateful to you. Thank you. And what about going to the Kirkdale group, please? Kirkdale. And who would like to respond on Kirkdale?
I guess that.
Kirkdale, are you unmuted?
Caroline, you are on mute.
I keep clicking. I'm unmuted now. I'm here.
We can hear you now. If you'd like to report, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Sacred space. Various ones. Walks in the countryside have been greatly appreciated. People in the garden, using the garden and growing plants. That was very evident in the first lockdown because it was springtime. I think, I know one other, a group from my church when we didn't have any online in the circuit, used to meet on Sunday mornings on Zoom and then watch together the Central Hall service and talk about it afterwards, and found that a great help. So those were the main ones.
That's great, Carolyn. Nice to see you again, by the way. You're all right?
Yes, and you. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah. Question 2. We thought we were very aware of our own limitations with keeping safe online. With Zoom services, get people dropping in that we don't know. How are we welcome? You want to share your links widely so that you're a missional church and you're welcoming people. Yet people can drop in that can mess with the technology and cause all sorts of problems. So that's what we talked about, and feeling on the edge of our understanding. And whereas we might be able to do risk assessments very easily for a building, online it's much more difficult because we haven't the knowledge. of what could be safe and what's worrying.
That's really, really helpful. And there's something coming up on chat I can just see there to possibly help us with that.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Carolyn, and that's grand. So we're coming up now near to the end, and I just want to say thank you very much for your presence today. And I hope that as we've looked together at the gift of place, of building and online, and how place has become very different during this past 18 months, we'll be able to share things which have been helpful to each other and get us thinking for the future. When we get back to some kind of normality, we are ready for it. Thank you very much for sharing so well in the discussion groups also. Over to Katie.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for today's session, and it's been lovely to hear those other voices as well within your session. So please do pass on our thanks for others that have contributed as well. We really appreciate how incredibly busy you are and have been. So we feel immensely blessed that you have been with us today to share, exploring this really important gift of place. Richard, throughout the past year, your ministry to the Methodist Church has been invaluable as we've all had to navigate through this incredibly difficult time. And I'm sure you personally will have seen, not just in a local sense, but throughout the entire connection, that sense of place has changed so many people. Some people may have felt a sense of loss and grief at the sense of place that has changed. But yet others will have found inspiration and joy in finding a sense of place in a new way. Some of the things you've shared today have just been really insightful about sacred space and those practical ways that we can all find God, whether that be online or physically. And I'm sure we will all continue to reflect on those things as we all explore what church looks like post-pandemic, whether that be physically, online, or in those other amazing sacred spaces that some of us have found and connected with over this past year. I just wanted to offer some other thanks to our district safeguarding officers and our techies. We've had Sam and Liddy and Catherine with us today, who have been trying to ensure that everything's run smoothly. There have been other people as well that aren't here today that have been involved in the planning of this virtual safeguarding conference. And as Carolyn said at the beginning, this has been a real learning curve for us, but we are extremely grateful to everybody who has been involved and everybody who's contributed in helping us find our place in the online and virtual world. So as we finish and as we close and just before we leave, let's just finish with a time of prayer. Lord, our prayers are with those who have felt lost and disconnected from your church without that physical space to meet. We also lift to you those who have felt a sense of finding their place in the online world and do not wish to return to church physically. And for those who have found sacred spaces beyond building and beyond the virtual world. As your church changes and diversifies, may we tread carefully and delicately to ensure that we consider the needs of all who are seeking to find a safe space to worship, to connect with you, and to share fellowship with others. May we hold on to the promise that there are no limits to your presence. Wherever we gather in your name, you will be with us. And a blessing as we head into the other tasks and plans that we all have for the day. May the Father's hand keep you from stumbling. The footprints of Jesus give you the confidence to follow. And the fire of the Spirit keep you warm and safe in your walk with God this day. May the love of Jesus Christ bring us wholeness. The grace of God the Father grant us peace. The breath of the Holy Spirit instill passion, and the unity between them give us strength for the rest of this day and every day. Amen. Thank you for joining with us. And if you are booked on another session later on this week, we look forward to sharing with you again then. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.